Right.
So the global meaning of Qigong is the art of developing Qi so that you have a single exercise that improve your body, improve your breath, improve your mind. And then ideally, your Qigong training is just building the skill, like going to the gym and lifting weight, so that you can take that into everything else that you do in your day. Basically, before the first monk came in, they had this kind of chart of, oh, this is, the better people we saw are reaching this level of activity in the prefrontal cortex and things like that, or some part of the brain. And then they got a monk and it just obliterated completely the preconceived notion that they had, and were like, okay, we have to start over. Professor Lin was one of the first in the mid 70s to measure a low infrared modulated frequency that was emitted from his Lao Gong at 1 meter distance, more than 3 feet. What may feel like an amazing state after like 2, 3 years of practice can easily become your daily state after 10, 15 years.
Welcome back to the Cool and Living podcast. Today we interviewed Fabrice Piché, a Qigong master and a clinician at a stem cell clinic called StemAid down in Cabo, Mexico. In this episode, Fabrice breaks down Western medicine and Eastern medicine concepts and bridges them like I've never experienced before. This was truly one of the best conversations I've ever had, and I can't wait until you get to experience what he has to say. Ladies and gents, Fabrice.
Good day
Hey,
or
Fabrice, how
evening.
you going?
Good yourself.
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
What
How's
time is it for you?
It's 7 in the morning.
7
Yeah,
in the
so
morning.
yeah,
Oh,
got up, did a good practice, and then get into this. Good way to start the day.
good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks for doing this. This is awesome.
Well, thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. I have so many questions because you obviously highly skilled compared to most people, and you've had a different background, different teachers compared to most people. And then you also
Hmm.
have something going on with stem cells too, which I'm just super interested in. My brother can't make it today, but he's like even more interested in stem cells than me, so we'll try to get to that. Um,
Hmm.
but firstly, maybe for people who don't know, what exactly is Qigong? I think most people might have heard of Tai Chi, but what is Qigong?
Hmm. Um, so there's different ways and different people will explain it differently based on their background. Qigong is a very general term. It's a terminology that was only coined in the 1950s. Before that, the word Qigong was found in as is Qigong, the two character together, and only a few texts, and most likely not meaning what we mean by it today. And it became a bit of an umbrella term that gathered all of the physical breathing and meditative practice under kind of this is the new category. It's almost
Right.
like saying meditative sport, if you will. If we break down the characters, we have the character for Qi, which explaining it in itself would take quite a long time if we look at all the different perspectives, because it goes from basically the gaseous substance or state that's at the origin of everything to the very nitty gritty specific gasotransmitter that we have in our body if we look at it from Chinese medicine. So there's like a really wide range, and because a lot of people who use the character Qi throughout history were not necessarily scholar either. There's a lot of like overly simplified way that the character was used throughout history. Martial artists will have sometimes a more crude perspective. People who study Chinese medicine will have a more refined and different types of qi and quality of qi that they talk about based on diagnostic and health issues. People who are farmers, who are working with the land, who are outside, will have different use of the word qi to talk about the weather and how it affects growing season and things like that. So the character itself is a really big perspective. Character gong, on the other hand, is a little bit easier to define. It's the same as in gong fu as well. It's a skill that is developed over a specific period of time. It's basically an art. It's
Mm.
a character that say, well, you take your chisel and your hammer and you just chisel a thing over time to make it more and more precise and better. Um,
Right.
so the global meaning of Qigong is the art of developing Qi, whatever Qi means in a specific category. And usually martial perspective of Qigong is a little bit different than the medical, which is more my specialty, versus the more spiritual, I guess is not quite the right word, but more religious temple type practice who do a lot more of meditative stuff. And we're
Mm.
kind of doing physical practice just to maintain the body so they could sit for a long period of time. Um, the typical story of the Shaolin Temple when the Bodhidharma Damo came and saw that the monk were all trying to meditate for hours in very damp and cold environment, and they were just falling asleep because their body weren't healthy enough. Gave them the Yi Jin Jin and some of the martial
Mm.
practice and the training that basically came from India, and that became known as all of the various Shaolin arts that developed throughout the few centuries, because that was in like what 500 of our era,
Yep.
roughly. So 1500 years of history developing. What they meant at the time is unlikely to be exactly the same thing as what we see it. Um, to make it a little bit more tangible or to anchor it to a notion that would be easier for the rest of our conversation. There's a really interesting book that was published in the early, I think it's around 2010, the first edition. That's Chinese medical qigong. It's the first, maybe not the first, but the first nationwide official medical qigong textbooks for Chinese Medicine University. And the definition is in it. I don't remember all of the detail, but it's the harmonization of body, breath, and mind. So body, we look at the structure of the body, the movement, the posture, the quality of the movement, the way the breathing is used and can be linked to the movement, and the state of mind. So the meditative, entering in the meditative state, which if we wanted to sound more modern and fancy, it's entering into an alpha theta harmony brain state with some gamma peaking here and there depending on the training.
Mm.
But that notion of harmonizing the functioning of the brain so that you have a single exercise that improve your body, improve your breath, improve your mind, in order to develop your skills. So yeah, I'm missing a little bit of I think there's a little part that they're added to that was interesting. But globally, this is the idea. So when we want to train Qigong, and I would say most people who train Qigong aren't doing Qigong yet. They're still in the
Right.
developing of how to harmonize all of the three pieces together. But yeah, you want your body, your breath, your mind to move together and harmoniously together to gain the better result of your practice,
Mm.
which is also what makes Qigong, I would say, different than just any other physical exercise or dancing or something else. You can have very good breath control and physical movement, and ultimately a high level athlete that has a moment where they're in the flow or in the zone, as they say, that they feel that everything just moves together and they 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 are taken by something as they're doing their sport, have a qigong moment within their sports practice, so to speak.
Mm.
um, but qigong is the idea of taking time to build the ability to maintain that state, and then ideally your qigong training is just building the skill, like going to the gym and lifting weight, so that you can take that into everything else that you do in your day. So the skill that you build up for that half hour or hour of training, you don't leave it in the room. You take that with you so that when you go cook a meal or wash dishes or walk to go to work, you maintain that meditative state as you're moving, as you're doing other things, so that those skills can spread really through everything. Um,
That's so interesting. 'Cause I know that Harvard University put out a study like a while back now, and it said that there was like four stages. There's the struggle, then there's the zone, then there's flow, then there's recovery, and it starts again. So when you're talking about you can build up this skill and like take it into life, is there a limit to that? Like, can you be in that state like almost endlessly? Is that the idea that you keep on building it up until you're sort of in this permanent state like that?
I think the more you build it, the more you discover that there's depth to it, that current study aren't barely scratching the surface. If you saw some of the earlier research that were done by, what was his name, Richardson, with some Buddhist monk coming to do fMRI research and observing how their brain works. Basically, before the first monk came in, they had this kind of chart of, oh, this is, the better people we saw are reaching this level of activity in the prefrontal cortex and things like that, or some part of the brain. And then they got a monk and it just obliterated completely the preconceived notion that they had. And were like, okay, we have to start over. Because, I mean, normal people are like toddler compared to these meditative people who have, 10,000 hours or more of meditation and have been
Mm,
doing that for so long. So I don't think that there's a limit of what you can really develop. I mean, everybody has some limit somewhere. We're not magical beings that can dissolve into the universe and keep living. Um, Once our body are done, we're kind of not us anymore. We're
yeah.
something else maybe, but that unit that makes us us now is not anymore. And so within the limit that each individual have through the continuous practice, we can always refine and improve the quality. And so what may feel like an amazing state after like 2, 3 years of practice can easily become your daily state after 10, 15 years. And then your training state just
Mm,
keeps bringing you deeper and deeper.
mm, that's so interesting. So you mentioned that there's like different contexts you can do it. There's like the martial context, there's like the health context, the medical context.
Mhm.
So, um, what's the difference between the health context and the medical context? Like for someone who's just getting into it, wanting to improve their health versus someone training for the medical. And then my brother also had a question in relation to that about how important is having a good teacher in relation to that? Is it 100% necessary? Like, what's the sort of steps for that?
Mhm. Two very interesting question. So let's look at the first one, the difference between health maintenance versus developing skill for clinical practice. Because the medical is really towards the clinical. And there's like a Venn diagram. You have a little center where both overlap, which is usually the space where the patient will lie. So they're there to improve their health, but there's either, okay, let me learn a form and then I practice a form which has usually a global positive effect on my body. The more I practice it, the better benefits I get. And then it takes me so and so much time, a year, 2 years to change myself completely through that practice. Um, the clinical application, which is where the overlap would go, is usually that the patient will receive specific exercise that's adapted for them based on usually a Chinese medicine diagnostic. So, as a therapist, if you have I know you do Chinese medicine as well. So, if you have a client coming in, you do your diagnostic. Let's say they have liver qi stagnation, simple. Everybody has something like that. So, liver qi stagnation, qi and blood is not circulating as well. These ones are relatively easy. You just give them any kind of movement will start to get better. But if they have something a little more severe where the liver yang is rising, they get some kind of headache, that qi is going up, it stays stuck above, below, their feet tend to be really cold because all the yang is up and it doesn't recirculate. So in this case, you would give them a specific exercise, or if they're already used to it, maybe a few, but most of the clients you see are probably not very physically active. So you need to give them something simple at first. And the idea, the simplest approach is to look at the four movements of qi: rising, descending, entering, exiting. Liver yang rising, we know it's just going up and it's trying to come out, but it isn't really succeed. So you could always give them a little bit of a safety valve above, helping them for the Qi to exit. But we mostly want it to go back down, especially if the feet are cold and it's a sign that the yang doesn't descend. So in
Mm.
this case, we want to give them an exercise where they will focus on the descending quality of the movement. Usually that will be associated with the exhale because exhale helps everything to descend a little bit better, bringing their mind through their body as they follow their hand movement towards their feet, and do that until their feet starts to warm up, because
Mm.
that will be a sign that the yang is actually starting to go down. You can combine that with some acupressure, simple massage. Gallbladder 41 is a really good one in that case, which helps the qi to descend. Kidney 1 can be a good one, which is Yangquan under the sole of the foot and connecting a little bit more with the ground. So giving them something where they can allow the qi to descend through their body, maybe pass through the liver, pay attention to it, bringing it down into the feet, into the ground, and get that descending quality in. And so in that case, the patient or the practitioner will have maybe just one or two exercise, something relatively simple at first, to improve the movement of qi that they need in order to heal. So that's the clinical application.
Mm.
Versus if somebody comes to see you in the same situation, liver yang rising, a lot of heat, etc., teaching them something even as simple as the Baduan Jin will take a number of weeks. They don't want to stay with that headache for weeks. They want you to fix it as quickly as possible. So giving them a little something very precise, guiding the qi back in the right circulation, and then through that, as the organ get better, then the emotional and stress and other psychological element that might be associated will be easier to deal with. The food that they may eat that overstimulate the liver, the greasy food, they'll be able to start to make the lifestyle changes that they need to. And at the same time, as the body get better, they'll notice, oh yeah, if I eat that, it's rising. So I need to do my exercise again. So maybe I won't eat that much greasy food because they have an incentive and they know when things starts to feel better. So
Mm.
giving them something short and efficient as a proof of concept, similarly as if you give them herbs and they start to feel better after taking it right away, they won't mind if it doesn't taste too good.
Yeah.
But if they have to take it for a week and after a week they still don't really feel any much of a difference, they're just not going to take it. So it's the same
Mm.
idea with movement. We want to give them something very precise and maybe in a certain way almost a little bit risky if it wasn't the right exercise for them. But because it's the right exercise, it's working. And because it is designed for, staying with the same example, descending the qi, once the issue is fixed, then they shouldn't continue to do the exercise, or at least not the way you taught them to do it. Not
Mm.
with as strong of an exhale, not as strong of a mental intent of descending the qi, because the body is a bit more harmonized. And that's where the health practice become much more useful because it's generally safer, more harmonizing, and they can start to learn like, oh, the exercise you give me was great. I want to know more. Here, this is a set you can learn. So we can take more time to refine, and therefore their whole system will function better overall.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it ties in with something else I was wondering I could ask, which is there's a difference of opinion in the Qigong world and Tai Chi world, I guess, in terms of how long things can take. Some people say, oh, you can do a Qigong exercise right away and actually it'll be very good. And there's other people like, oh, well, you need 10 years before you can learn to do anything correctly, you know? So from what you're saying, it seems like as long as you have someone who can give you the right exercise and show you the principles, it'll work.
Yes, and that's because that person has studied for 10 plus years usually and have a whole lot of background to understand and give you something simple that's perfectly targeted to your situation.
Mm.
And therefore it gets better. To make a simple analogy, it's like going to the gym as a general health maintenance exercising practice versus having a physiotherapist that gives you the exact exercise you need to fix your postural issue. It's the
Mm.
same idea. They're usually the same kind of exercise you'll end up seeing, but there'll be very specific detail based on what you need and how to practice it versus just watching some video online or having a personal trainer that just gives you general health or bodybuilding kind of concept.
Mm. So I think I've heard that you've studied under many different styles of Qigong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Throughout your time. So what are some of the things you've learned along the way, like sort of base grounding principles that you think, or maybe someone's going through Qigong, they're not sure where to go, they've hit this block, and like you obviously would have been through those blocks and adapted. So what are some of the things that you know now in terms of principles, and also in terms of what's different to what you do compared to what's different to what, the mainstream or what other people might do?
Mm-hmm. Um, so since 2011, I've been focusing on one particular system, Taiji Qigong Shibashi, which I had the opportunity to learn with Professor Housheng, who's the creator of that system. So that's really my main focus now for the past 15 plus years. And I decided to focus on that particular system because it's the system that spoke to me, that I found very efficient. And throughout the years, as my own understanding and practice and development continued, I never ended up in a place where I said, oh, wait a second, what I've learned doesn't make sense anymore, or there's something that kind
Mm.
of clashed together, be it through a better understanding of the principle of osteopathy or craniosacral work and that primary respiratory mechanism, how all the bone move inside the body, which we consider the movement of the Jing through the bone marrow. So how all of the system from a deeper insider. I never had a teacher explain to me or studied, I should say, bone marrow washing, but a few different people that I've met that do have that in their system. When I explained it, they're like, yeah, that's pretty much the same thing. It's just explained a little bit differently.
Mm.
So that level of feeling how the marrow and the circulation within the marrow is functioning. Um, and so whether it's that, whether it's deepening my understanding of how the biomechanics of breathing works, it just keeps fitting with not only the primary respiratory mechanism, but also everything that we do within the movement in Taiji Qigong Shibashi or within the Shaolin Neijin Zanzuan system that Professor Lin studied before he created his own system. So all of that just kind of falls into place. It's like you have a bunch of pieces of a puzzle, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, but yeah, they just all fit. And you're not left with a random piece that doesn't go anywhere. You just have
Mm.
a nice, full picture. Um, so the way I see it and the way I teach it, really much, I see the system as just a tool, because that's what it is. Any system that you study is a tool so that you develop the skills, because that's the gong, that's what's really interesting. And then those skills you can apply to everything else if you have a system that integrated them into you. And ideally, my goal is that my students can become their own teacher as soon as possible,
Mm.
meaning that I want them to be able to drop in a space where while they practice, they discover new things within their own practice. And therefore, they have a question, something they're not sure. Yes, we can, have a discussion amongst peers, and some people are a little further along the way and they can tell you, oh yeah, this is how I fixed it. Or, oh, it seems when I watch you do this, it seems there's a little bit of a blind spot in that aspect. Your mind stops somewhere rather than allowing the expansion. If you do that, it will change the quality of what you do, because we all need people to point our blind spot, otherwise they wouldn't be called blind spot.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea is to give us enough tools to observe within ourselves how we're doing things and notice when some things start to plateau, there when it doesn't quite unravel and flow as well, versus finding ways to like, oh yeah, this is flowing, and therefore I can just stay in that state and wait for the next development to continue.
Mm.
Um, and For somebody who starts, I would say usually the main things, well, learn the choreography that you're going to do, learn the physical movement. And as you're doing that, start to harmonize upper and lower body together, and then harmonize the breathing pattern in the middle, which will link the two. Once the breath can easily harmonize with your movement, then usually the sensation of qi becomes a lot stronger, even if it was there before. And usually people can feel some level of qi around their hands relatively easily, even if they never did any qigong. It's part
Wow.
of who we are as human. But once you start to feel it, then gradually that sensation will become more present around yourself at first, around your arms, maybe start to feel it a little bit around your legs. Gradually feel it deeper inside until you can start to feel those full movement through your body and harmonizing your physical movement, your breath, the PRM, the feeling of qi. The more you can stack some of those layers of understanding together, the more efficient your movement become, and therefore the least amount of effort you have to put in to gain the bigger benefits.
Mm. It's so interesting when you're talking like this system. Qigong's incredible, and like what you're talking about is opening my mind too. I guess on a micro scale and a macro scale, like where did this stuff come from? Like your system, where did that come from? And where did Qigong come from? Like, because it's incredible.
Mhm.
There's nothing like it. Do you have any,
Yes.
uh, yeah, feelings?
I mean, even historically, as far back in China as I mean, to some extent, even in some texts like the Tao Te Ching or the Huang Ti Jing, there's certain passage that talks about usually more the breath, how to use the breath to kind of regulate some layers of the body. There were already even in texts like Chuang Tzu where he talks about Daoyin practitioners. So it was important enough at the time that he considered he needed to make fun of them in his text. Because the passage, he's like, well, yeah, they think they're going to gain, they're going to reach out the Tao by stretching out and doing Dao Yin, but that's not the right approach. His approach being more through meditation practice and another aspect. But the general idea is that there were practices, physical practices that were already popular enough and spread throughout society that they were doing it. And some of the older texts, what they found at the Mawangdui tomb, the drawing of some of the movements and things like that. We don't have an actual origin. We just have, well, at that time it was popular enough that people started to make things that we can still find today. Doesn't mean that it wasn't there before. It's just the oldest pieces that we found. Uh, what's the link between, I'm not super familiar with yoga. I'm sure they have very old text as well. I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. A
Right.
lot of information came also from India, at least through Buddhism as it reached out to China. But, you know, there were cultural exchange through different societies through such a long way back. So using the modern term Qigong to refer to these arts of the past, even though they had a different name, it's hard to say what's the actual origin. And what little bit that we have now is likely that it was very different back in the day anyway, the way they were doing things.
Mm.
Maybe not so different. The human body hasn't really changed since then. It's more how do they practice. One of the oldest medical Qigong text, which was recently translated into English. This one is from the little plug for Dolly Young books here. That's very, very interesting for those
Wow.
who like historical stuff. So it's basically the Sui emperor from 580 to 618, that's the relatively short dynasty, uh, had asked the doctors, the imperial doctor, to gather a textbook of exercise for health based on the Daoyin style that were popular at the time. So it's interesting because it's really a kind of medical aspect where, um, so five zong and six food disorder, for example, and you get into a
Wow.
section of symptoms of liver disorder, and they explain the symptomatology based on Chinese medicine diagnostic and give you a bunch of exercise that at the time they consider would be great. Unfortunately, once the following emperor came in, they kind of discarded it. So it was a relatively short-lived period of history, but it still was there 15,000 years ago. No, 1,500 years ago. Anyway,
Yeah. Well,
1,500 years. Yeah. So we have some of those traces very far, and the renaissance, so to speak, of medical Qigong started more in really the 1950s, although throughout history you have very famous figure like Hua Tuo, who did the five animal play, which we still have different variation of today, which he designed as an exercise for health for people back then. So there's a really long history of that. I'm not the best verse and following exact date and things like that. I'm not a scholar in that sense. I'm much more of a practical practitioner. But
yeah, yeah.
it's very interesting to kind of have that broader perspective of history of the development of medical Qigong.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned the resurgence of medical Qigong in China. And from
Mm-hmm.
someone who's like researched and tried to YouTube all the videos, try to find out what was happening in those hospitals back in the day. Are there still any Qigong hospitals today in China, or was it a thing that happened and
Um,
it kind of got shut down? What was happening back there?
Yeah, so during the 80s and 90s, the Qigong boom, sometimes translated as Qigong fever in the West, kind of made everybody was doing Qigong everywhere. And there was a lot of some officials, some just personal clinic that were growing and doing a lot of element of Qigong for health. And then came through that development came Falun Gong in particular, which had at least at the leading area, kind of a political background, and so the government shut it down, and they kind of stopped almost everything related to medical qigong. Especially back in the 80s and 90s, it was often more the health ministry that was promoting some of those groups. And when they had that big crackdown in the late 90s, as far as I know, there's only two establishments that stayed open. The one in Bedaihe, which was one of the original one, because a lot of Beijing people were going there and was relatively close, and the Shanghai Qigong Research Institute in Shanghai, which was Professor Lin's being the director
Oh,
of the
wow.
institute at the time, and because of his tie to some of the leader within the Chinese government, they kept it open. Also because of his general stance on qigong being much more scientifically oriented, trying to research and not trying to turn that into a religion or a cult, made it so that they were very confident in maintaining it. So, as far as I know today, the only two main one that kind of passed through time are the Shanghai Qigong Research Institute and the Institute in Bedaihe. There's, of course, a lot of smaller private clinic that are around, but the government-run ones, I think these are the only two that kind of passed that transition in the late 90s, early 2000. And that's when Qigong ended up in the hand of more the sports and leisure ministry, which created the Health Qigong Association, which is the main one that the Chinese government has been promoting since the early 2000s, and that we see kind of spreading out throughout the world, which is much more health maintenance, kind of geared almost more towards sports activity, a little bit of peak performance idea, but a lot less or almost none of Qi development as a main core in the medical sense, and almost none of the Qi emission development that were also fairly present in the 80s and 90s.
Mm.
So that side, that the deeper side that was closely related to Chinese medicine is uh, im almost impossible to find. There's still a few people that are doing it, but they're usually private clinics, not in the official curriculum. I was in China during the summer. I went to see Andrew in Chengdu a little bit, and I was there also in close to Xi'an, where at the Shahanxi University of Chinese Medicine, where one of my acupuncture teachers is from. And we had a little group that was there and visiting the hospital that's associated with the university. And I was interested to see if there was anyone doing some level of Qigong. And beside the health Qigong aspect that they had at the university with, some student practicing with the Wushu team and the Qigong team, in the hospital, no one really had that much depth of Qigong. So much so that at some point I was talking with the head nurse of the one of the Chinese medicine department, and she was giving our class a little bit of a demonstration on some Moxa gua sha tool that they were using a lot. And she was talking about, when you do some of the rotation and moving around, you have to move from the dantian and, using some good theory that we hear quite a bit around. And the way she was doing it, she obviously had skills. So afterwards, when we stepped out, I kind of talked to her a little bit on side. It's like, oh, you were mentioning, movement of the dantian and things like that. Do you practice any form of qigong? She's like, well, I do a little bit, but not too much. Are you familiar? And I started to kind of talk and give a little bit of element. And gradually, I see her eyes open. It's like, can you show me a little bit what you do? I want to see. And so it was like we were talking about Danzhuan and how she was practicing. And so I was explaining to her the Shaolin system that Professor Lin was doing. And she was like, oh, could you have a look at my posture? And then she showed me what she had been practicing. And for some reason, her teacher didn't quite help align her structure. Her shoulder were a little bit too far. And she had that gentle tension in the lumbar, not too much, but enough that it wasn't as efficient. And so I helped her realign that structure. And right away, within a minute or two, it was like, oh, wow, that's like very different. The intensity that I feel now has never been like that. And so we chit-chatted a little bit more, and she actually invited me to come back the following week because they had like an event at the hospital for the staff and their family, and exchange was like, come and teach all of my staff some of the Qigong that you do. So I got to go and spend an hour with them and sharing some of the simpler movement and kind of basic stuff and discussing the Qi perception and these layers of it. So that was very, very interesting. And at the same time, a little bit saddening from my perspective that this level of quality of Qigong is so hard to find in
Mm.
China nowadays. Like 20, 30 years later, because it almost stopped very abruptly. Understandably, there were some group that were exaggerating and doing things that weren't very good, even in their practice. But there was a lot of good that just got tossed to the side. And so my hope is that it can kind of reflourish and specifically within the Chinese medicine community, realizing the diamond of a tool that Qigong practice is to not only as a therapeutic tool, but even more so for us as therapists to really make sense of the medicine. Because once you
Mm.
start to feel how the Qi interacts in your own body, the rising, descending, entering, exiting, the channels opening up, the relationship between points that through your practice spontaneously activate, and you can feel how that fixed something inside of you. Is like, oh, that's why classical recipes say to needle these 2 points in order to fix it, because they do talk to each other when the Qi is strong enough.
Mm.
Um, so learning Chinese medicine with that tool of Qigong just for personal development make so much more sense on an organic layer rather than learning theory that even more when we're not from that whole culture where the notion of qi is imbued in Chinese culture, not just in the medicine, but in everything. So even people who never studied Chinese medicine can understand and have a better relationship with those theory than people in the West who never connected to it. And all of a sudden you go and, oh, that, studying Chinese medicine sounds cool, so let me study that. And then you learn a bunch of theory and you're just, okay, that's all fun, but that doesn't match with my life experience because these notions were not part of our upbringing.
Mm.
So through Qigong is how we can really internalize this understanding.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. There is this huge gap, isn't there, in the West where we have no concept of Qi. Like even me to this day, I'm like, yeah, okay, like I've studied it, gasotransmitters, so yeah, the other side of it. But it's like it's really so hard for the average Westerner to get their head around it. It could take ages. Um, Talking about applications for someone who's wanting to use Qigong maybe for themselves or in their practice, what are the kind of things that if you train well, you could expect to happen at the, few-year mark, 10-year mark, and then like what are some of the things, if you would like to share, that you've seen with, your teachers or yourself?
Hmm. Um, I would say within practice, uh, having a rounded practice is what will give you the better growth. And by rounded, I mean something that has enough movement as well as static practice and some level of seated meditative practice as well, so that you can, because each type of practice will have a stronger focus on one side, whereas the other, although they're included in it, they're not as, they're not the one on the front seat. So the seated practice will force you to really train up the mind and quiet the mind and get into, in our system, we call it the state of tranquility. It has a bit more of a Buddhist Zen background, although in Taoism they have like emptying the mind kind of concept as well, where you want to be in a state where, if we look at it from a modern brainwave layer, you stimulate both the theta alpha harmony, so that the mind is quiet, the beta kind of moves out, and through that state you can get peak of gamma that gives you kind of that more intensity when the chi really comes up versus when it comes down. So you need some of that to train that quality of quiet mind. But if you only do seated work, it becomes a lot more difficult to translate that as soon as you get out of the cushion. How many people have you met that are able to sit down and meditate and be relatively good for 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe more? But as soon as they get back up, the screaming monkeys start to fight in their head again, and the meditation is over.
Yeah, been
Yeah. So versus through moving Qigong, this is where you build that resilience of maintaining a strong enough effect of the alpha and theta layer, while even though you're moving and all of your brain is a lot more active electrically, because as soon as we start to move, there's 10 times more activity in our brain. The electrocardiogram, the layer of electricity that's going on, just explode as soon as we start to move, and especially if we move even above, it's even more. So maintaining a solid alpha layer activity while we're moving at first is a bit more difficult, but as we train the breath, as we train the movement, and that's why we start a lot slower as well, we can build our ability to maintain that meditative layer functioning in our mind as we're moving. So it becomes easier to bring it elsewhere. Movement will generally create a lot more circulation of the chi, and as we time it with the breath, then we have those pressure and vacuum pumping mechanism that helps everything to rise on the inhale and everything to descend down on the exhale. We want the blood to return to the heart and lung as we inhale, because that's where the oxygen is more present and the gaseous exchange works better. And we want that freshly oxygenated blood to go to the brain first, because the brain gets first dip. So as we continue to inhale, there's that rising quality, which will also connect with proper alignment of the spine, which allows cerebral spinal fluid to rise at the same time, because we have this buildup of pressure gradient that allow the rising to come up together. And then on the exhale, the descending. So through movement, we get a lot more circulation going on, which helps to remove stagnation in areas that are a bit closed. They start to open up so everything can flow better. And then through posture training, particularly once we get into the right posture, which is basically the ideal biotensegrity structure, where not only the fascia, but also the muscle, tendons, everything gets stretched harmoniously, where gonist, antagonist, muscle kind of work together in a way that gives you a solidity while maintaining maximum relaxation and lesser amount of tension needed for the structure to hold, then you're just pulling all of those collagen fiber through that are piezoelectric to build up more and more energy. So the ability to build an intensity of qi comes best through posture training.
Mm.
And so you have the movement that removes the stagnation, because if you have too much stagnation, you try to go straight into posture, that buildup will start to bang on those stagnation. And, if you stimulate too much the qi and go against the stagnation, you just make it worse, and that's not very comfortable. So having a balanced diet of movement and posture is where you get your body to kind of gain the better structure or the better harmony, so that your training can move forward a lot faster. Um, the basic step is, first you want to be healthy. You want to go back into a general homeostasis state. So if people have some issue, their practice will be first to harmonize themselves. Help their breath to find a 6 breath per minute cycle, which is what current science considered the most harmonious breathing, the one that helps the nervous system to calm the better, the one that harmonizes the functioning of the brain the better. There's been quite a few different research over the last 10 years that show that 5.5 to 6 breath per minute is kind of the sweet spot as far as a regular type of breathing to calm you up. In traditional literature, going down to up to 1 breath per minute gives us something else that those research haven't found yet. So, we got to understand that the research can only talk about what they can see. And some of the deeper, more subtle effects are not yet readable by our current tech. So I keep that side of things like, well, there's definitely a lot more that we can't really understand yet, but that will come in the future. But with the current step, harmonizing our practice to roughly 6 breaths per minute, both through movement and or posture, allowing fluid circulation, blood circulation to improve, and harmonizing the nervous system so that everything just gets better is the first step. Once you have that, then it depends as a person, an athlete, a therapist, what's the branch that you want to develop. If you're doing a lot of martial arts and you're actually doing fight and you need that strengthening, the golden belt type or iron body type training will make your body a lot stronger and a lot more resilient. Good in the short term, not so good in the long term, because it tends to create a lot of stagnation and tense in the body. And for health purposes, not quite ideal. There's other training that can help strengthen your body and make it able to absorb and more resilient in the fighting context that are also beneficial for health, but usually the health benefits are secondary. The medical and then that's where in between the martial and the medical, you have the health maintenance, which is not quite as intense as the martial. It's just enough to give you a good maintenance and you're happy and you have your little routine and it keeps you well in health. And if you do a little bit more of it, then your health is a little bit better. Then you have the medical training, which one part is understanding as a therapist how to use those movements to reestablish health. But there's also the Qi Emission side, which we haven't touched, which is a little bit more, I'd say a little bit more taboo because we don't have quite enough understanding to really say, yes, it works perfectly. Professor Lin was one of the first in the mid-70s to measure a low infrared modulated frequency that was emitted from his Lao Gong at 1 meter distance, more than 3 feet, which was present only when he was emitting qi and not if he was just holding his hand out of the blue, and not present if other people were holding their hand in front of the captor, the machine that they had to measure it. So they kind of started up the discussion on the scientific research, say, well, there's something that can be measured when qi is being emitted. That doesn't mean that infrared is actually Qi. It's just one of the quality that can be measured of the Qi when it's present. Some other people had more electromagnetic wavelength that were measured. Some people had more static electricity that were measured. So there's quite a big array within the electromagnetic range that were measured from different people based on different kind of training. And from what Professor Lin was saying within his continued research after at the Qigong Research Institute, the infrared wavelength is the one that seems to be the most beneficial for healing.
Mm.
Which is interesting because that matches, if you're familiar a little bit with the research of Gerald Pollack on the fourth phase of water and how infrared wavelength is actually the one that increases the layer of easy water, which is also all over our own body within blood vessel, helping to send everything that is not part of that easy water to the center, increasing circulation and kind of cleaning up the surroundings. So if we have more of that infrared wavelength that penetrates the body, capillaries better opening. Well, everything that we do in moxibustion in Chinese medicine, infrared lamp that have been studied is also part of that. So that layer of Qi emission that produces more infrared that have a deeper penetrating effect because it's the human frequency. Moxa actually has been chosen as the better herb for that because it's the closest one to the human frequency, but it's not quite the same. The infrared from human is much more penetrating. It's very interesting when people who never felt that are of a sudden are like, wow, I can feel my kidney warming up and you're not even touching me. How is that possible? Like, yeah, part of it. So the training to develop those skills in medical Qigong for the therapist is very specific, a lot more Danzhuan in that case, because you want to build the intensity of your Qi and some movement to help develop and improve the circulation through your channels. And once this is done, then it becomes easier. And that's usually a 3 to 5 year relatively intense training. So you want to go from, if you train about a half hour a day, and that's these time are valid for everyone, it's kind of a maintenance. If you just want to do something that is good for you and you want your health to mostly stay the same and not degrade, half an hour is good. If you want to start to gain benefits from your training, you want to have about an hour a day. It doesn't need to be just a 1 hour session, although once you want to dive into stronger development, a complete 1 hour session is more beneficial. But if you do like 3 20-minute session or 2 half hour, you'll gain skills over time, day after day. But it will probably take you 10 years to get to a certain point. Whereas if you train 3 hours a day, then it may take you 3 to 5 years to get there, half the time. Building up the skill and really developing it, training more intensely will make a difference. And in the case of posture training, there's really something interesting when you push yourself and are able to go from, like, the general people say, oh, if you do 15-20 minutes, it's good. Yeah, you get one cycle. If you do 40 minutes, you get a second cycle and things starts to change. If you do an hour, that third cycle start to really feel different. And if you do that day after day, it keeps building up a lot more. If you're able to do an hour and a half to 2 hours, there's multiple cycles that keep repeating. And every time you go through, which those cycles are roughly 20 minutes, which is about the time the kidney filters our blood, it gives you different waves. And then, oh, it's building up and the intensity is stronger again. And then it may go back inside, do something, and then all of a sudden come back and fills you up all over again. And you have this kind of pulsation over roughly a 20-minute cycle. Can be a little less, can be a little more. It varies from people. But gaining those and having 3 or 4 or 5 of those cycles in one session really makes a huge difference. So yeah, what can you expect depends on how much you put in.
Yep. Classic. That's really interesting. I don't want to get too political. Well, actually, I don't care. I do want to get a little bit, because a lot of people, Qigong practitioners say that, it's not, you can never measure it with science. It's impossible. And obviously some, states are quote unquote mystical, they can't be quantified. But do you think that eventually, as our tools progress and what we can measure, do you think all these things will be able to explained
I
scientifically?
think so.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. My perspective is really that, I mean, if it works, because it triggers something within our body. So we may not have figured out what it is exactly yet, because I mean, science is evolving and we're only limited by the tools that we have in order to observe it.
Yep.
A simple example within some of the research that were done for acupuncture. One research that was done, I don't remember exactly, they were like in the mid 2000, between 2000 and 2010. We're measuring or trying to demonstrate, is inserting a needle on an acupuncture point important, or is it just sticking a needle somewhere that gives you a benefits? And they were measuring through pericardium 6 at the center of the wrist. And they were putting the needle in, and then they were putting the needle somewhere else. And they were using also kind of a sham, not penetrating, just kind of barely touching the skin kind of sensation to try to see. And what they've noticed at the time with the technology that they had was that the body was reacting to the skin being pierced. It would calm the nervous system, which is kind of a normal reaction you would expect. If you have an accident, the body naturally lower the blood pressure, the skin has been open. We don't know if there's bacteria that will come, whether it's a very tiny acupuncture needle or it's like a knife that just cut through. The body protect itself, and that protective response have some health benefits. So they were looking at it and they said, well, we haven't found any difference between doing it on the point itself or next to the point, but the response was clearly more if you have a needle that's inserted versus the sham just on the surface, barely pressure type of thing. Fast forward a few years later, where they used a different type of fMRI in order to observe what was going on in the brain, doing the same thing with PC6. And what they noticed at that time is that sticking a needle in PC6 was actually stimulating the heart rate variability center in the brain, which was not stimulated if the needle was next to the point in an area that is not on the channel. So even though sticking a needle in itself gives us certain benefits, the location of at least PC6, which is very well known for calming anxiety and relaxing the heart and all of these benefits, actually showed a reaction in the brain that relates to the nervous system, heart rate variability, and therefore calming ourselves. So that's one point, all of the 300 and plus that we have. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done to say, is PC6 exactly at the same place for everyone, or is there something else? Is it a big zone? Is it a very narrow area? We don't quite know. There's traditional or experiential results of the whole history of Chinese medicine. Everybody knows if you have that issue, you have palpitating a bit, just massage that. It will help you to calm yourself. Even if it's, not the only thing you do, at least it will momentarily help you to relax.
Mm.
So there are these benefits that we know that we haven't necessarily observed yet. And some of the research just haven't been done because there's no monetary benefits in doing those research. So there's a lot of things that are on the back burner that we'll need to wait a little bit to figure out. As far as Qi goes, I think the studies on gasol transmitters from the context of Chinese medicine, because as we briefly talked about at the beginning, the concept of Qi itself has a few different meanings based on the context, and Chinese is a very contextual language. But if we stick to Chinese medicine, then it's a lot easier because we have some elements that are very clear between Wei Qi, defensive Qi, Ying Qi, which is more internal, nourishing, Gu Qi coming from digestion, Yuan Qi coming from the kidneys. And if we look at the definition of these type of Qi and take it as a different language, and look at biomedical explanation of the different kind of gasol transmitter, not just the name, but the function that they have. And we try to match the function. we start to have a very clear map between them. So that's one of the layers that's very interesting because there's, 20 plus years, 25 years now of research on gasol transmitter. If we look at nitric oxide, which is the one that's been the most studied, um, it is most likely the correlation with Zen Qi through Qi, which we can split in Wei Qi and Ying Qi. Wei Qi more towards the surface, fits with INOS and the induced nitric oxide, which we have more on the skin, which we also have through the microbiome that we have on the skin, that the type of production of nitric oxide that comes in if we get cut, that protects us from the environment that our white blood cells are producing to defend ourselves from virus and bacteria that are invading. So there's this notion that there's a whole system that produce a defensive nitric oxide that's there to protect us. ENOS, endothelial nitric oxide, that's more present through the blood vessel, help increase circulation of the blood, vasodilation, is the one that's much closely related to Ying Qi, the nutritive Qi. That's the layer that's deeper, closer to the blood, like we have explained in Chinese medicine. There's some concept like Qi is the commander of the blood and blood is the mother of Qi. And if we look at it and look at the relationship between blood and nitric oxide, well, we already have, the vasodilation layer of nitric oxide increasing circulation and therefore commanding the circulation of blood in general. And that nitric oxide is produced through the blood vessel. But if we go even deeper, if we look at the red blood cell relationship with nitric oxide, red blood cell produce their own nitric oxide, which will make them shape shift in order to be able to pass through capillaries. That was one of the layer we didn't fully understand in biomedicine for a really long time, that capillaries were actually smaller than red blood cell, and somehow red blood cell were able to pass through it. And they're usually very further away from the heart, so it's not the heart pressure that creates enough pressure for it to pass through. So there was a bit of a kind of question marks there. And now we know that the red blood cell, once it gets to the capillary bed, produces nitric oxide, which make it shape shift, twist itself to be able to pass through, which at the same time release oxygen. And then as it passes through, is able to kind of gather the CO2 and then turns into the blue blood and then return to the heart. But again, blood is the mother of Qi, if we consider Qi nitric oxide or some type of Qi nitric oxide, and Qi is the controller of blood or governor of blood. It shifts the shape of the blood, controls it.
Incredible.
It is. So when we look at this from more of just a language difference that actually talks about the same thing, it start to makes a lot of sense. Now we can ask ourselves, how the hell did the Chinese 2,000 years ago knew about that? That's another debate. But the fact is that their definition is so clear that it matches the observation of modern science of what's going on in the body. So that's interesting. The same way that, hydrogen sulfide, one of the other main gasol transmitter, has a lot of connection and relationship to Yuan Qi, the connection with the kidneys, the connection with Jing, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of those parallel that we can look based on the typical function that we know from Chinese medicine as the global map that we have, and then the observation of the terrain that biomedicine is doing and the research that continues to grow.
Yeah, that's incredible. You mentioned Yuan Qi there a little bit. Maybe this is a good time to talk about stem cells. So,
Sure, yeah.
When you look at some of what stem cells are doing and the impact that they have when people take them, you're like, Chinese medicine, is that Yuan Qi? Like, what is exactly going on there? What do you think stem cells are doing? And what do you see their future?
Yes. So depending on the type of stem cell, maybe let me just frame my perspective
Please.
and where I come from. Um, I'm not a scientist from the Western perspective. My study layer is Chinese medicine, but I currently work in one of the most cutting edge stem cell clinic in the world that's here in Mexico because they don't allow these type of stem cell in the US. And it's called STEMaid if people are interested to go look it up. And they're using pluripotent embryonic stem cell. And as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't heard of any other stem cell clinic who do the same thing. STEMaid has been using the same embryo for the past 20 years to harvest the stem cell. Basically, as long as you harvest the stem cell before they start to differentiate, the embryo just keep producing the same as long as you feed it. And so
Wow.
it's the only line of stem cell that has been proven and used on thousands of people now for the past 20 years with a proven track record of healing benefits that they have, on top, of course, of all of the other IV therapy, the massage, the Chinese medicine, everything that's involved within the clinic. So it's a multidisciplinary clinic that at its core has stem cell. And so when we talk about pluripotent stem cell, I would link it much more towards Jing and prenatal Jing even more so. Because of its effect. And there's something that's important to understand because the stem cell that our patient receive is not directly from them, with some exception of people who are going through a bigger procedure to harvest and develop their own stem cell with their own DNA. The stem cell that people receive is not their own DNA. Therefore, the body get rid of them within 72 hours. But their presence trigger a growth and development of their own stem cell. It's almost like a turning back the clock as a way of the body to start to reproduce that Jing level of repair inside. Which, because it comes from embryonic layer stem cell, it's not the same as the adult stem cell that our body is naturally producing, which is more the acquired Jing, the level of Jing that we produce as we're aging, that's closely affected by the food that we eat and our state of mind as a primary element. So this injection of external stem cell kind of boost and trigger a return to a production of prenatal Jing quality versus a postnatal Jing quality that are more the adult stem cell that are not indifferentiated. So they're either, skin or fat or some layer of the body that they can reproduce. But these ones being pluripotent embryonic really allow the body to produce any type of stem cells they need in order for it to heal whatever issue there is to heal.
Wow, that's so interesting. So essentially, it is like a fresh influx of Jing, which, according to
Mm-hmm.
Chinese medicine text, depending on who you ask, sort of it's not possible to replenish it. But from the sound of it,
Well, 2000 years ago, it wasn't possible. I mean, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, it probably wasn't really possible either, since that technology hasn't been developed. Now we're in a state where um, science gives us a new opportunity that didn't really exist. And I mean, again, it's difficult to really know what prenatal Jing is completely from a Chinese medicine perspective because they're just explaining it in their system and haven't quite found an exactly one-to-one definition explanation yet. This is one of my personal hobby of mismatching, and one of my project is to make basically a dictionary, translation dictionary between Chinese medicine and our understanding of
amazing.
biomedicine. Yeah. So
Wow. So
I
do
think
you,
that would
yeah.
be a very good way that wouldn't diminish either side and just help both sides better understand each other and just go, oh, we're actually talking about the same thing. Okay. Um, and have
Absolutely.
Chinese medicine, which has that overview, kind of the global map of the terrain, where biomedicine or modern scientific research helps us dive into each part of it and look at them and really analyze what is there. Um,
Mm, that's incredible. That would be so great for like both communities. Um, do you think there's a limit to stem cells, or do you think in terms of like when you're looking at modern medicine, from both sides, Western medicine, Eastern medicine. Do you think stem cell is one of the things which shows the most promise in terms of heading into the future?
Definitely. It has its limit, and that's, part of it is the prognostic, the host who's receiving them, what's their level of health. Um, I've been working in that clinic for, was it almost 8 years now? And within that time, there's two patients that I'm aware of who passed away relatively shortly after their visit to the clinic. Uh, Understand that these patients were already, at the end of their life in both cases. And they kind of came to the clinic as a last ditch to see how much. And even though we could see improvement at that moment, they just had a better end of life than the complete descending. One of them was a Lyme disease patient who had been very strongly affected, and it's one of the worst case of Lyme that I've seen, just for how quick and fast it affected that person's body. And interestingly, that was a really healthy, strong person, big physique, probably in his 40s, so not very old, but for some reason it just tore through his system extremely quickly in a relatively short period of time. When he
Mm.
came to the clinic, that person was already in a wheelchair, needed help to eat, was barely able to move. So that was really just and even though through the 2, 3 weeks of treatment, he was getting better, was able to hold himself, was able to start to eat, was breathing better, a lot of things were improving. Unfortunately, by the time he went back home, his body gave. And the other person was a bit more recent, but it was an older gentleman that was already in his late 80s to early 90s who had some level of Parkinson, had difficulty moving. It was amazing to see how he was arriving also in a wheelchair and able to walk through the 3 or 4 week time period he was at the clinic, and was getting a lot better and much more alive. But as he went back to the United States, within a few weeks, he passed away. I'm actually, from experience, I'm kind of wondering if it's even just the travel that was too tiring for the body and that just went too far out.
Mm.
Because seeing how well they improve while being at the clinic, it doesn't quite make sense that it would collapse so quickly afterwards. Unless level of stem cells are stimulating the Jing, but the body was already at the end of its Jing, so they kind of push the quality but reduce the timing of maybe a few weeks or a few months. But at
Oh,
least they had higher quality of life during that time because everything was opening up again. Um,
wow. That's interesting.
and again, that's just a reflection mostly based from the Chinese medicine style. Doesn't have any scientific link to it, and it's just two cases. So very anecdotal and just on a reflection phase.
Yeah, no, sure. What
Mm.
are some of the positive instances of stem cell use that you've seen?
So the clinic, when I started working there, first had a big boom of patient who had Lyme disease because they were able to help a few people, and where the word spread out in the community, and people are very connected online in that. Some people return to a completely normal life with very little to no side effect from Lyme disease, and even doing the test showing that they didn't have the bacteria anymore. There's still, an unknown as far as it just dormant deep in little pocket of um, biofilm hiding and not gonna be awakened until much, much more later if something really drops in their immune system, or is it completely gone? We don't have a tool to fully know. We just have to be, honest with how diagnosing these bacteria is. But there's definitely a lot of people who came and said, wow, I mean, my life is back. I have a life again, from being stuck for a number of months in bed without being able to get out to actually going back to work and living a normal life. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
incredible.
some of the combination, because again, stem cell are at the core of the treatment for rebuilding the body and helping the body heal, but just getting stem cell for Lyme treatment wouldn't be enough. So there's the whole protocol as well. So linking to the original question, people get different type of IVs to and some level of chelation, EBU, which is ozone therapy that kind of takes out the blood, filter it, and turn it back, which helps remove a lot of the biofilm. We use a lot of the botanical biohacking products from Andrew and Lon for restoring gut microbiome. The foot soak play a big role in it, especially when people start to have neuropathy or lower body issue with that. So there's a lot of element, acupuncture, medical qigong treatment in certain cases. So all of that come together to make the person in the better health state they can be and clear out what needs to be clear. So first, clear excess, then rebuild and stimulate the body to strengthen so that there's no deficiency left. And so stem cells work as the best tonification tool because it starts from the Jing, the Yuan Qi, and then build everything from the ground up. If your organs are already working, then you get more surface result that you can see faster. If they're a little bit affected and you're not aware of it, then there's all this underground or deeper yin healing that happens to first the zong, then the fu, and then reaching out to the surface. So some patients come to the clinic, get treatment for 2, 3 weeks, and don't really see the result until 2 to 3 months later because the effect of the treatment keeps working and kind of turn your healing in overdrive. So that by the end, by the few months later, then you look back and like, oh, I just did a full day outside with my family doing Christmas shopping, and I'm back at home and I'm not exhausted. I wouldn't have been able to do that a month ago. So it's just by looking back at where you were at that you notice the transformation and the healing that happened, which you were like, oh yeah, that couldn't have been possible like a few weeks ago. And now I can really do it and I don't feel exhausted. So yeah, that works.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much.
You're
Um,
welcome.
we uh, we have this thing where we get the person from the last episode to ask a question to you, and then if you like,
Hmm.
ask a question to the next person. So
Sure.
their question was, do you think it's possible to live a life without a goal or constantly having on your mind something to do and still live a content life?
I think so. Yes. Um, so especially in the West, we have this very goal driven and you need some direction. So that's the Shen. Your Shen, you need to know where you're going to give a direction. So is it necessarily a goal? Maybe. You need that direction. If you don't have any direction, you're not going anywhere. So in that sense, you can't develop yourself if you don't have a direction. Would I call that a goal? Maybe, maybe not. Goal sometimes is very specific. I want to, I want this job or I want that amount of money or I want that partner in my life or I want that thing. So to me, a goal is sometimes more of a thing than necessarily a direction. And I think if your goal is too narrow, you're going to miss better opportunities. Whereas if you have a direction and within the direction, you may have an idea of a goal, but if all of a sudden you find something better, then ditch it and move forward. Go farther, go far, go further, improve it. Um, so having that state of this is the direction, but I'm not, locking on just a specific target. Because as you evolve and transform, that goal should evolve and transform as well. And it gives you from the point where you're standing now and you're setting that goal, there's millions of things, there's an infinity of things that you're not aware of. And as you get aware of, they may become a much better idea for you to do than that first goal. But if it's in the same direction, then yeah, just keep going. So
Love it.
it's a bit of both, I guess. Yeah.
Amazing. Do you have a question for the next person who comes on?
Hmm. I don't know. I'm not a really big
No need, no need.
question person.
Thanks so much. This this
Yeah.
is incredible. It's your understanding of how you can break things down scientifically and your chi, like when I'm talking to you, I can feel your chi. Like it's legit, legit, dude. And yeah, such
Uh,
a kind dude. Thank you so much for sharing.
well,
It's been
it's a
amazing.
pleasure, Ron.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have that longer chat with you. We'll need to get back in touch about the training you started as well, so
Yes,
we
yeah,
can
yeah.
move
Need to
that
do
in the
that.
right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Good.
Thank you, man.
Great. Pleasure. Thank you for having me and say hi to your brother.